It's the final day of June. July starts tomorrow. That means the free agency period opens. Let's talk about free agency on a little Free Agency 101, Hockey 101 on this episode of Locked On NHL in Utah.
You are Locked On NHL in Utah, your daily podcast on all things hockey in Utah, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I am your host, Robyn Leonio, alongside Tom Callahan. We want to thank everyone for making this show your first listen every day. We're free and available everywhere you get your shows. It's a great episode, a very rare Sunday episode, Tom, as we get ready for the free agency period tomorrow. But because we've had such a busy week, the last 7 days or so is just nonstop news cycle for the National Hockey League. Today's no exception. I mean, it's kind of like a little bit of a lull period as we get ready for tomorrow. But why not use today to maybe teach a thing or two some people? Maybe you already guys know about free agency period, and maybe you want to learn a little bit more about it. Maybe you don't know anything at all and kind of want to turn to us so we can teach you everything you need to know of what exactly is going on tomorrow.
Well, there's gossip, there's rumors, there's intrigue. If that's your thing, you're probably you're a true crime fan. You might like this part of the hockey off season.
It's Christmas in July. That's my.
It is for some of these guys. It absolutely is. It's kind of funny because part of you wants to think that because the Stanley Cup has been handed out that, hockey season's over. Yes, the on ice part of it is over, but actually the run between the cup handed out and the first, I'll say 2-3 days of free agency is insane because it is rife with rumors and speculation, things that need to be vetted and verified. And then some trades happen, some movement happens. Guys may declare themselves available heading to the open market. Guys may sign deals and stay where they are. Like a lot of things continue to move. And so that's why this little week and a half stretch is just so critical to the fortune of every NHL team heading towards next season.
It really is. And I just want to also mention that I think officially, according to many, many boards, I think even according to CBA, I think this, July 1st technically is the beginning of the new season.
Yes.
So July 1st,
fiscal July 1. Yeah.
Yeah. Fiscal. Yep. It is the beginning of the new season. So the 2024-2025 NHL season begins tomorrow. That means it's the first official day of the very first season for the Utah Hockey Club. We'll get to some of that maybe in a little bit, but I think today all we're dedicated is teach you guys of, what are the ins and outs of all this. Who exactly, what kind of players are eligible to become, quote, free agents or truly sign with whoever they want starting tomorrow. And teach you guys about clauses, the salary cap. There's so much to go into free agency. It's going to be, we'll have a lot of fun teaching you guys all this.
The only clause is Santa, buckle up.
Let's get right into it, Tom. You have a list of players, of types of players who are officially eligible for free agency beginning tomorrow.
Yeah, so there are different types of free agents, and this is all bargained collectively in the collective bargaining agreement between the league and the Players Association. They get together and they hammer these things out. So here's a brief list and an understanding of who there is. So there are unrestricted free agents. You hear them referred to as UFAs. They're free to sign with any team. Previous team receives no compensation for them signing. They can begin meeting and interviewing with teams the day after the entry draft or June 25th at the latest, depending on when the draft is. They cannot sign until July 1 at noon Eastern. Okay, so those are UFAs. Then there's what's called Group 3 UFAs. This is the most common UFA. So a player becomes an unrestricted free agent if their current contract ends either after 7 accrued seasons or they're 27 years old as of June 30th. Now, an accrued season is defined as a year in which a skater is on the roster for at least 40 NHL games. For goalies, it's 30. If a player is on the team's roster but injured, the team's games count towards the 40-game minimum. So that's important. That's why you may see guys juggled up and down between the American League sometimes to keep them from reaching free agency earlier. Group 6 UFAs. A player becomes a Group 6 UFA if they are 25, completed 3 or more professional seasons, have a contract expiring, and played less than 80 NHL games. So this is designed to help younger players who might be buried in a system move on. It's a little different. Goalies, it's 28 NHL games with more than 30 minutes of ice time. So it's to help younger players who might feel they're buried in a system move on. Professional season is defined as any season where a player aged 18 to 19 plays in 11 or more games, which is why you hear us talking about sending a guy back after game 9 and game 10 is so crucial. And a player 20 or older plays 1 or more professional game. And a professional game is the NHL, the AHL, ECHL, or European Pro Leagues while under an NHL contract. We're almost done. Non-qualified RFAs, which is a restricted free agent. If a player who is a restricted free agent does not receive a qualifying offer or a QO from their team by June 25th at 5 p.m. Eastern, they then become UFAs, free to sign with any team, no compensation, July 1. Undrafted UFAs. You'll see this is rarer, but does happen. And a player, so Jimmy Vesey is a good example of this. Danny DeKaiser was a player like this. No longer eligible for the entry draft, but who was eligible, maybe not selected, becomes a UFA. Some guys blossom really late. They come out late, and all of a sudden you might hear of a little bit of a bidding war for their services, and suddenly guys are available and nobody owns their rights. So every once in a while you get an undrafted UFA.
Absolutely. So there are just, that's a, a list of all the different types of players, and it's amazing.
There'll be a quiz later.
There'll be a quiz. Oh God. But you're right. It is a lot. I mean, all these different types of groups. And I feel like it's funny. So you mentioned Group 6. It just reminded me of those kind of players, the ones that, like, once they reach 25, like, for some reason, when they're, when they sign up a new team, technically they can still technically be considered a quote rookie because they haven't accrued enough to games to be a rookie. So, like, I think, what was an example? Michael Bunting was an example of that, right? He spent so many years in the Arizona Coyotes organization. And then once he reached 25, he signed as a Group 6 RFA with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And I think and towards the end of the next year was a Calder Trophy finalist at 25, almost 26 years old. He was a Calder Trophy finalist. People were kind of joking about that. It's like, what? Where in the world did he come from? Why is he here? It was pretty funny, honestly.
Yeah, but you know what? It's the rules are there again, designed to let those players flourish somewhere else. Yeah. And if they're not getting their break in the system where they want, the worst and most egregious case, of course, was Sergey Markov winning the Calder Trophy as Rookie of the Year, which is kind of I don't want to say it's a joke because he was a great player, but the problem is he was 31. So they've kind of changed it since then. But, Makarov came over in 1990-91 from the Soviet Union and came over. Had obviously a brilliant rookie campaign, won the Calder, but at 31, everybody's going, is this guy really a rookie? He's been playing as a pro in Russia for 12, 13 years. He can't be rookie eligible. So that was actually one of the things that spurred some change as far as defining what is a rookie, what age, etc.
You just reminded me. I just wanted to give a little fun fact because you mentioned his name. I was a classmate with at one point with one of Makarov's kids.
Interesting.
Back in my hometown of San Jose. It was pretty cool. Really, really, really interesting. I just love to just put that out when that just reminded me. But
That is a fun fact. Who would know?
Yeah.
That would go on your 2 truths and a lie. Like, as the icebreaker, you do that, the corporate icebreaker or the party icebreaker, 2 truths and a lie. That could be on yours.
Absolutely. Let's really quick kind of run through against some of the other aspects of this all, because you mentioned no player can sign, but somehow we know that by let's say what noon Eastern is when that period opens.
The floodgates open.
By noon 30 seconds, we're already hearing it all.
Right. Things start to blow up. And that's why they get that little pre-negotiation period. And sports have kind of built in I'll call it a discussion window, because anybody who thinks there wasn't discussion going on before then, you're kidding yourself, but back then it was technically letter of the law tampering. Now it was nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Everybody does this. So I think what they just did is they finally said, look, everybody's doing it anyway. So no harm, no foul. We're just going to go ahead and say, hey, here's your window. And that's all they've done. It basically, if somebody for some reason wanted to get cranky pants and go after another team for tampering, they easily could. And so I think just to prevent that from ever really becoming a big thing, they just said, hey, all right, this is a legitimate window.
Yeah. Plus, I think all of this is really it's all mainly back channeling. Like, it's not really like it's like I've made the joke. It's like, how does it exactly work? Yeah, it's like, I think the most part it's like a representative, like, let's say an employee of Bill Armstrong goes out and reaches out to an employee of the agency, not the exact agent, but the employee of the agency that this player is, like, just to kind of like, tell your boss this, and then it kind of goes a little bit of negotiation.
They pass a note in a brown paper bag. The drop is made at a mailbox on 24th in Maine, and then you have to collect it at exactly 11:59 a.m. And that's how you get in touch.
Exactly. That's how it very well seems to be that way. I mean, it's kind of funny, but what we're going to do is we're going to keep going into this, continue to talk about what's in the contract and negotiation. We're going to discuss the salary cap, because the NHL salary cap is very unique compared to the other leagues out there. We're going to talk, the difference between cap hit and AAV. There is a slight difference. We'll talk about that. Also, what are the difference of all the clauses? There's so many to get to on this free agency 101 episode of our Hockey 101 series. We'll get to that right after this. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and the sports aren't just sportsing like I want them to, but FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All you have to do is open the app and dream up bets at any time I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. That's something for everybody, every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon to start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. I want to remind everyone really quick that you guys can go ahead and subscribe to our Insider Text program through Subtext. You guys can be a part of this new program, get your first 14 days free, and if you use our promo code SUMMER50, you get an additional 2 months, 50% off. You'll be able to get exclusive content from us, text us one-on-one, get some opportunity to really be a part of this Utah hockey community that we're trying to build here with the Locked On NHL in Utah podcast. We're really looking forward to it all, and why not be a part of it? But let's continue things going, Tom, as we talk this Hockey 101. It's Free Agency 101 in this series, teaching everybody what's going on in all of this. I want to talk a little bit about the salary cap because it's really interesting. Technically, there are, out of the 4 major sporting leagues in North America, there are 2 leagues that implement what we call a hard cap: the National Football League and the National Hockey League. The other 2, I think, baseball doesn't even have a salary cap, and basketball has a soft cap with a luxury tax, right? Those are very different.
Baseball has a luxury tax.
Baseball does have a luxury tax, but it's not even really like it's a lot more.
You still have to spend to win in Major League Baseball.
Exactly, right?
Yes.
It kind of does. It means almost nothing at this point. In football, the thing about football, Tom, is players and teams can opt out of their contracts at any time. In the NHL, we have guaranteed contracts. The only way you can get out of them is you buy them out, and they still count against your cap, and it's a hard cap. You cannot go over that whatsoever, or your team gets penalized.
So the difference, NFL without guaranteed contracts, is guys can get dropped for any reason anytime. And that's why guys hold out, because you're only as good as your guaranteed money. And you have to get guaranteed money written into your contract to get paid, because there's nothing saying 2 years into a 7-year deal, an NFL team can rip it up. And they can, and they do. And that's sometimes how they get rid of and get out from under the cost of paying injured players. It's kind of nefarious, but it works that way. So what the NHL does is they've gone to the flip side of that, where you cannot get out from under the contract and you are penalized for buying it out. Now, you would think that would save GMs from themselves. It does not. But it does give certainty to the players. And I think that in many cases can encourage players to sign a deal that if ordinarily they wouldn't, to be quite honest with you. Some guys will settle. We'll hear a guy say, well, he's looking for term. What does that mean? It means he's looking for the length of the contract. You know, a guy could be looking for salary in the short term. Some guys, we call it a prove it contract, sign a 1-year deal. So everybody's got a different priority based on where they are in their career, based on what their expected earnings could be. There's a whole lot of things at play, but I'll be honest with you. I think it is fairer to the players who truly are the capital on which the sports engine operates to have a guaranteed contract.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to mention too, you mentioned those different kinds of contracts. There's also what was popularized during the John Chayka era of the Arizona Coyotes was those bridge deals, right? They weren't prove it deals because they weren't 1 year, but they weren't termed because they weren't in like 5 to 7 years. They were like these 3-4 year contracts worth like mid-level amount of money. It's like, all right, this is at least going to get you up until your next thing, but we'll see what happens then.
Right. And that's a little bit longer than a prove it, but guys have cashed in off that. I mentioned PK Subban last week, a guy who took a 2-year bridge deal in Montreal, went out and won the Norris Trophy in year 2 of that contract. Guess who got paid?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. But yeah, when it comes to these, to the salary cap, and again, it's really interesting of seeing exactly how these teams try to stay under as much as possible. And again, as we've talked about before, where when you enter the playoffs, it kind of doesn't exist anymore. And that's why you have LTIR players who, they're on the injured reserve. But
like Hall of Famer Shea Weber of the Utah Hockey Club.
Yep. We'll just stick there. And then, obviously it's going to be different if we make the playoffs. Like, oh, guess what? He's healthy now. We're going to go activate him.
Yeah, that's the other way you can circumvent the cap. Oh, great point. Great point, Robyn, if I may. So players are only paid during the regular season. They are not a 365 days a year, get a check every 2 weeks like most people who have a job, or you get
paid for 82 games.
Right. So they are paid from the start of the NHL season to a regular season to the end of the regular season. After game 82, the checks stop. The money they're playing for in the playoffs is just simply playoff share, which is paid into by the players paying their dues with the NHLPA.
Yeah. And I will say there are also like other kinds of bonuses that these guys get. That's why they still take these deals. Like there's signing bonuses that they'll go ahead and take on July 1st. And then there's performance bonuses. I'll give you an example of as a performance bonus. If you take a look at, Puckpedia or Cap Friendly or whatever your, cap table website of choice. I mean, Cap Friendly only for a couple more days at this point. Take a look at Logan Cooley, right? He's got a basic entry-level contract, but he's got a performance bonus for every year, at least a couple years, worth of almost nearly $3 million.
Right.
Like, so those are also, put into those kind of deals. And and if I'm not mistaken, most of the time performance bonuses haven't been really caught against the cap, which is why if you take a look at the Tom, and I kind of want it going into this bit, the cap hit versus the AAV, right? Because you take, and I'm going to use Logan Cooley as an example. And yes, it was an entry level contract, so that's kind of a little bit of a different situation here, but still good, worth mentioning. Logan Cooley's cap hit is, I'm going to bring it up right here. His cap hit is $950,000, right? For the Ranger for his next couple entry level deal. But his average annual value is $4,450,000. Why? Because I mentioned he's got that performance bonus. Most of the time, those two numbers are the same. That is an outlier of why they're not. But most of the time, because the cap hit and AAV weren't together, because we're talking. Most of these players don't have performance bonuses anymore, unless you're, again, rookie, younger player. Signing bonuses and all the other cash spread out throughout your contract. That's your average annual value, and most likely also your cap hit.
So now, and let's talk about a guy who just activated a bonus by winning the Stanley Cup, Kyle Oposo. Had it written in $500,000 bonus for winning the Stanley Cup in the contract he signed with Buffalo. He was traded to Florida, and when they won the Cup, he's now due that bonus. That $500,000 counts against Florida's cap next year. So, because it's too late for a playoff bonus to be retroactively counted against the cap, that's unfair to do. So the 500,000 now forwards itself to count against Florida's
next year
24-25 cap.
Yep. So then, and that's kind of another way of, like, kind of, again, circumventing the cap in a completely different way, even though it doesn't really.
It's basically pushing money to next year in a way. And of course, I mean, what are the odds, right? I mean, they did trade him into a situation where they hoped he would win a cup, and he did. It worked out. But what are the odds? The odds are 1 in 32.
It was very rare to see that to happen. But so if you ever see that, and if you ever look at again those tables, and you say, why is the cap hit and the AAV different? Look for the performance bonuses. That's very likely what you're going to see, because sometimes it doesn't get paid out, and that's why it is, as you mentioned, that's why we see them, see those two numbers that are different. And most of the time they are the same. That's why all we say is, oh yeah, it's a 6-year contract with a 7-year AAV, whatever it will, 7 million. That's what we hear. We just always say is, what's their AAV. That's all we say.
Right. And that's generally what you're figuring everything out on. So, I mean, now look, teams that are $2,000 of cap room, believe me, they are nickel and diming everything. They're doing all the maths.
We're doing everything they can.
Yeah. You're tap dancing on that line. But I mean, for Utah, it's not going to be a huge deal.
Oh, it won't be a concern at all.
Yeah.
As we mentioned time and time again, $20 million before they even reach the floor at the time of this recording, $40 million to reach the cap. They're not going to hit the cap. I don't think they will. I don't think they're the team that even remotely even need to do that. They'll be just barely over the floor, because, I mean, at this point, they already have a decent chunk of their team filled out. They just need
and they can always pull Weber's money back onto long-term IR. And elevate that way if they want cap relief, but they don't have to.
Yeah, they don't. They really don't. What we're going to do is we are going to continue this conversation. We are going to kind of talk about the different clauses. You might hear what some certain clauses of what goes in there. We're going to talk about what each of them mean and why they're all different. We'll talk about that right after this. All right, let's go ahead and finish things off on this episode. Get to some of the final aspects of some free agency talk. Teach you guys what are the ins and outs of free agency. I want to get to some clauses of contracts. I only put 3 of them on here because there are multiple. The most common that you'll see for early on is ELC. It has, technically is considered a clause entry level contract. It means Yeah, especially because those kind of contracts can be, you can slide on over if they're not playing, at least for their first year. You got waivers exempt, and then the three that I mentioned. If you're watching on YouTube, you got no movement clauses, no trade clauses, and modified no trade clause. They're all very different, Tom, and I feel like we should mention those. I want to get into the other ones too. It's 35 plus and what some of the other ones mean, but these are the main three: no movement, no trade, and modified no trade. Let's get to the first two because I feel like those can be confused a little bit for someone who might not be inclined. Let's go. Yeah, but let's go ahead and lead it off.
No trade is the easiest one to explain. It means no trade. There are ironclad no trade clauses, which mean you cannot trade that player without that player's permission, and they must sign off on or approve any move to any team. You have the ability to ask a player if he wants to be traded. Now, just because you have a no trade clause doesn't mean you won't be traded. If a situation goes sour, certainly a player can waive that. Also, sometimes you'll hear a GM ask a player for a list. But so no trade means exactly that. No trade between NHL teams. No movement means you can't really be sent down. You cannot be moved within the organizational ladder. That's what that means. And so and that's why some guys have no trade, no move. But sometimes you hear players, especially in the past, right? But we've heard players in the past end up with their NHL salaries buried in the minors because there's nothing else you can do. You don't want the guy on your roster. So, like Jack Campbell, right? Jack Campbell becomes everybody's favorite guy in the American Hockey League, making $5 million, in the American League because he was moved down to the American League. They buried his salary in the minors, and it doesn't mean Edmonton's still not paying it. They're still not taking the hit, but there's a difference. If he had a no movement clause, they could not have moved him down, and they would have been stuck with him on the roster. They would have basically had to carry 3 goalies. Yeah,
absolutely. So and again, there's a kind of reason why those clauses are in place. And I feel like, and as you mentioned, sometimes those, they ask a player to waive that clause for a reason or another. Modified no trade clause that you kind of already touched on in a little bit. In that case, a player sends a number, like a list, right? They'll send a list of a number of players, a number of teams, certain number of teams. It could be a 6-team no trade, 6-team trade team list, 10-team, whatever it might be. Like, these are the teams that I would be willing to get traded to if it comes down to this. All the other ones I will not go to.
And the difference is with the modified clause,
or it could be the latter, whatever it is.
Right, and you've just got to provide it up front with a modified. So if it's a modified NTC, and it can work either way, you can say, I'll get traded only to these 2 teams, but not the rest of the league. Or you could say, I'll get traded to the rest of the league, but you are not sending me to these 2 destinations. It can work both ways. But the difference is a player with a full no trade, the GM has to ask them to waive that and then provide their list. So you have more power, really, situationally. Let's say at the trade deadline, I'll just pick a team out of thin air, Dallas. Let's say at the beginning of the year, you have a modified no trade. Dallas looks like a cup contender. That's a team you said you would take a trade to. But by the trade deadline, things go sideways. The wheels fall off. With a modified, you can't change your list. If you have a full no trade at the deadline, if the GM asks you to move, you don't have to put Dallas on that list because you're just handing it in right at the deadline. So there is a difference. Modified no trade clause still gives players some form of protection over where they can and cannot be moved to.
Yeah, and then again, as you mentioned, the full no trade clause, they at least have a little bit. It's a little bit extra protection, but it's
definitely stronger, and you don't have to waive either of those. You don't have to waive your no trade. You can just say, you know what, I am staying right here. You're stuck with me.
And that's why they do that. That's why you might see what's interesting is a lot of times you'll see a contract where, let's say it's a 7-year contract worth $7 million, AAV. And it has a no trade clause in place, but that no trade clause doesn't kick in until year 4 or year 5 of that contract.
Right.
Sometimes they'll see that.
Yep. David Poyle was famous for years for not giving those out because he just didn't believe the players should be granted those. And I kind of agree with that. I mean, I think that gives a player too much control over the fate of your franchise, especially if they go in the tank. But I mean, it's so commonplace now. There are players who won't go somewhere without one. They won't sign deals without one. And if you don't hand one out, you have no chance of signing that player as a free agent. So, you know, which is kind of crazy to think, but now it's more expected that you will pony up for a guy and give them that form of protection. You
will. One more thing I do want to mention in terms of a clause. It's something not necessarily a clause, but it's more of like a type, just I guess a type of contract. And I mentioned it a little bit earlier, Tom, and it was those 35 plus contracts. Mm-hmm. Those I think are real, like those are really put in place, I think, to maybe protect those, like it's to protect those players in the case of getting bought out. Really, because if they get bought out, they get essentially they get their full guaranteed money. It's not going to be a 20% or whatever, a small percentage of it like you might get earlier on. If you're 35 plus, you're getting your guaranteed money.
Those are the hockey version of the Lifetime Achievement Award. If you've played pro that long, and generally guys who reach that 35 contract have played between 12 to 15 years in the NHL. Yeah, that's the Lifetime Achievement Award. Yeah, you've earned it.
It's interesting though, because like in the case, like you've seen a 35 plus, I've seen a couple cases when the 35 plus contract is bought out, and that team is just, they still have to eat the full salary cap for the remainder of their contract.
Yeah, it can be rough, and it can go south. And so you're taking a real risk signing that player, which is why. Like there's an injury risk, there's a production risk, there's all kinds of risk, but there are some exceptional players. So Jaromir Jagr is an easy one to point out, but was playing into his 40s. And so he's one of the players that's the deal you end up, you know, enforcing the over 35. But you're right, it protects those guys who are towards the end and ensures. But that's the other thing now, if you're a team and you're going to sign that, you better make sure that even if it bites you, and really it's a coin flip, that you have enough room to get by with that.
I'll have an example slightly. It's like it could be an example adjacent as an example here. I'll use my hometown team as the San Jose Sharks as one. We're talking a few years ago at this point when Joe Pavelski was around 35 years old, getting ready for his contract. The Sharks decided, well, we got under young guys, we're going to go pay them instead. Kind of, don't know. You don't know what you're going to look like a few years down the road. We know what term you want. Don't know if we can pay you that because we don't want to risk it. They didn't take that risk. Dallas did. Paid out for Dallas, absolutely more than enough. So sometimes, again, a team just not willing to take the risk. Sometimes it bites them for not taking it. Sometimes whatever it is. But sometimes, yeah, you're right. That the risk is not worth taking, especially if you're the kind of team who has the window of what you think you have.
It was unbelievable how long the Sharks kept their window open with having guys like Marlowe and Thornton and Pavelski. And man, they played on forever, those guys. So, and eventually all things come to an end, but it's just kind of crazy to think about how they really did extend out their careers and the window, and we're still productive, but those guys are an anomaly. That's rare, that case.
It is certainly rare. We're seeing a lot of times in which players will retire by their, in the earlier half of their 30s, because at that point we're talking about an incredibly tough sport. That's why the 35 plus contract is,
the elite players make it that far.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else on contracts and other things, other elements that I haven't mentioned that you feel like it's worth teaching to some of these guys, Tom?
I think that you also have to remember that when you may question why your team didn't sign XYZ player, the relationships with the agents is huge. It's not just the relationship with the player. If Drew Rosenhaus likes dealing with Bill Armstrong, there's a much better chance that they'll figure it out. You know, and if whoever doesn't like, you know, if Drew Rosenhaus doesn't like dealing with, I don't know, Ottawa's GM or Montreal or whoever, or a client had a bad experience there, that's the other thing. That word spreads. You know, I mean, so Utah is a blank slate right now. Nobody really knows what the experience is going to be there, but they can talk about how they've been treated in the organization. But somewhere like, so let's say you're talking about potentially going to Anaheim. Hasn't been a contender lately, but you want to know the experience of going to Anaheim. What is it like? If I'm a guy with a family and kids, is that a place for me? If I'm a single guy, is that a place for me? Like all of these things play into it. So it's not always, and I know it's hard to remember that as a fan. Sometimes you just get offended because they didn't pick your team. What do you mean they didn't want to come to my town? That's not always it. There are lifestyle fits. There are other kinds of things that play into it. There are reputations. There are things that we will never hear about. They may be a whisker away from getting a deal done, and then something else happens. So try not to take it personally, I think, is the important part. But absolutely, it's like sales in general and in life is relationships and relationship building. That is what gets contracts signed.
You mentioned like something that's really interesting. You mentioned especially the relationship between the team and their, you know, and the agents as well, and the players' agents. It kind of reminded me almost immediately of you know, how the Coyotes organization relationship was with Alan Walsh. That was a bitter relationship. Alan Walsh talked crap about the Coyotes at any time you can get. So if you ever wanted if anyone in the Coyotes organization wanted anything to do with Alan Walsh, yeah, freaking laugh in your face about it.
Alan Walsh is a hilarious follow on Twitter, by the way. But so if you want to know what you need to know about Alan Walsh, who is a very, let's call him a proactive agent as far as his players go. He was the guy who tweeted the picture of Marc-Andre Fleury being stabbed in the back in a Vegas Golden Knights uniform. Okay, and if you didn't see this, go look it up because I'm sure somebody saved it for posterity. That was from Fleury's agent about how he got treated by the Vegas Golden Knights. So
wasn't the sword named DeBoer, right?
I don't even remember if there was a name on it. It was like a political cartoon. You're right. The sword was through the back of Marc-Andre Fleury while he was down making a save, and it was just all very dramatic and but basically implying that, yeah, they had stabbed him in the back. And I'll be honest with you, at the time I was covering Vegas for another outlet during that whole run. And boy, there were just no good answers coming from that front office. And everything just kind of added up to DeBoer really did say, you're out. And unfortunately, they paid a lot of money to Robin Leonard based on half a season. Another reason why I don't like paying guys a lot of money based on a season where they're good and not 2 or 3 or 4 where you show long-term productivity and growth. And Leonard battled a lot of injuries. He battled, you know, some mental problems, and he talked about those, and he battled physical injuries. So really never quite got through all of that, but just became another, you know, cautious example of picking the wrong horse. But along the way, burning a bridge with a guy who, and this is incredibly rare, but was the face of the Vegas franchise. Marc-Andre Fleury, still to a lot of people, is a Vegas Golden Knights. You know, it's hard for me to think of him in Minnesota. I can't even remember him in Pittsburgh. I think of him as a Vegas Golden Knight. That's who he is.
Yeah. I mean, he was he was the first guy there, right? Like, you know, he was the first love.
And he was perfect for it. Perfect. Couldn't have picked a better guy.
Absolutely. But yeah, you're right. You're right about Alan Walsh. Very proactive agent. But yeah, he had good relationship with the Coyotes, you know, hoping it doesn't continue with Utah. By presumption, it probably won't because different owner. Yeah, I think Alan Walsh has had a major problem with Alex Morello and what they were doing at the arena situation rather than with the actual team. But that was about to my 2 cents.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll see. Time will tell, right? I mean, Alan Walsh, look, is still going to have, at the end of the day, he is a businessman. And if the best deal is to sign his client with a team that, even though he absolutely hates the GM or despises the way a team does business, but if that's what's best for his client,
He'll do it. Yeah.
He'll do it. So that's why you hire an agent as a player.
It might take a little bit buttering up, but he'll still do it.
Yeah.
Anyways,
might make you feel like you owe him one.
Exactly. Anyways, any final thing before I close things off?
I'm pretty sure I'm exhausted at this point.
You're exhausted. So. Yeah, I hear you.
I've used up all of my notes.
Anyways, that's going to be it for this episode of Locked On NHL in Utah. If you like what you heard, don't forget to leave a review, like, comment, subscribe if you have yet to already. We're available everywhere you get your shows, including on YouTube, SiriusXM, ad-free on Amazon Music, as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Don't forget to interact with us on social media. We are on Facebook, facebook.com/LockedOnNHL in Utah, and on X at LO_NHL Utah. I am personally at Robyn_Leonio. Tom Callahan is at Callahan on air. Interact with us. As a question you might have, we might answer right back on a future episode of the Locked On NHL in Utah podcast. And as a reminder, one more time, you can be a part of our new Subtext Insider program. All you have to do is click the link in the description. It includes the promo code. Or once again, send a text to 801-760-9033. And we'll get you started, get you on some exclusive content as we get ready for the rest of this off season and the first season for the Utah Hockey Club. Thanks again, everyone, for listening to today's episode, and we'll see you guys next time.